Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump Recruitment discussion. This week, I think it's going to put us all out of our comfort zone, as well as reminding us that when it comes to recruitment delivery, what the clients are looking for first and foremost is really great candidates and quick delivery from there. This week, I've got Dave Pye, who is the most technical man I know.
Leave me alone. I've brought my abacus with me so I can help.
And we've got the newly appointed tech talent judge for the TR Awards. Okay. So we're going to have a proper conversation about technology. When I said it's going to be a very honest conversation for people who aren't technical about how we should work tech into recruitment. So today it is all about a recruiter's guide, to maximizing your ROI from a technology. So first question, let's push this out straight away. Recruitment agencies invest heavily in tech. So many of them are still relying on manual processes. Why do you think this is a huge disconnect, and why does it exist?
You go, Dave.
I was waiting for Paul to go. No, he's not on. So, I think a lot of it is habit. I think consultants just get used to doing things the way they've always done it, with a CRM, an old CRM or a new CRM that's come up, and whatever shortcuts they can find. And I've been there. We've all been there. They if they work, they use them. And I think it doesn't matter how many times a team leader or a manager or an IT specialist within the organisation says, don't do it this way. If a consultant is having success doing it their way, which probably use partial use of tech rather than best use of tech, the habit that they form is the way that they do it. And if they're having success, they don't see any other reason why changing it. Combined with a lack of understanding of what the tech can do for them, I think those two particular instances can't explain why consultants don't use tech the way that they should.
Yeah, I think that if we're brutally honest, I think that the main reason is because some of the steps that we ask our consultants to do in tech do slow down their processes. And I think the challenge for me is there's a lack of understanding at a recruiter level as to the increasing importance of the power of data and data at a macro level that we have within our CRMs. So I'll paint you a picture. I'll give you a story, and I can do this on the first answer. This was the answer to the last question. I'd be getting a death stare from Howard now because we're running out of time, but I can take my time on the first one. So I'll give you the story I'll tell you is of a recruitment consultant who's an average recruitment consultant, competent but not exceptional, who is sat in front of a customer. They're on a PSL, maybe one of 3 agencies, and the customer says, we've got a project, we want to hire 5 people with this skill set. And the individual sits there and shows the customer that there are only 51 contractors in the UK with that experience, and that 6 competitors of theirs within 50 miles are looking for similar skills in the next 4 or 5 months. They then show the customer that the time to hire of that customer is 11 days longer on average than those 6 competitors. And the bottleneck sits between CV submission and interview. And then off the back of that, they agree an exclusive project with the customer to control the message to the market, increase the chance of getting the CVs, and they revise and simplify the recruitment process to strip out those 11 days and increase the opportunity to hire. And they wrap that all up as an exclusive project. Now, that actually happened within a business that I supported. And the key thing was that consultant would never have been able to have that conversation without using the data from their CRM. And they would never have had that data if they hadn't inputted every step of every requirement that they filled with that customer and the competition. So every recruiter you talk to will want to be that person in the room, having that conversation, looking credible and intelligent with the customer. So you have to sell that dream. You have to sell the benefit of data input, not just bang people with a stick and say, why aren't you using the CRM properly? Because that's where the disconnect comes. They have to see the benefit to not only the business, but to them as individuals for inputting and using the CRM correctly.
It's interesting, isn't it? We talk about lack of training, lack of understanding, lack of commitment. And I don't think it's the lack of training and commitment from the consultants. I think what all agencies do is they, as Dave said, they create habit. and what you've mentioned there, they create habit. And these habits are allowed to become so deeply ingrained that changing them is really hard. And I think the biggest habit is the business owner. The business owner tends to be sort of removed from the coalface in most cases, quite often not, but in most cases they're removed from the coalface and don't actually understand what the tech does, don't actually understand what the capability of that tech is. So what you're talking about there, Martin, is, you know, explaining what the ROI is, what the capability of the tech and the data that you create is, and therefore, if the client isn't getting, if the owner of the business isn't getting their hands dirty on the tech and understand the tech, and they don't immerse themselves in the tech, then training isn't a priority. They can't use it because they just expect the recruiter to naturally pick it up because they think it's an intuitive, because that's what we're being sold by the tech people. It's intuitive, when most recruitment processes aren't intuitive. And I think recruiters then are like water. They find the easiest route to what they do. And because we're brainwashed with these habits, it's easier to go back to the old habit than it is to create the new habit. So I think we've got to start to think as recruitment leaders, if you're going to buy a piece of tech, you should immerse yourself in that tech, know what that tech actually does. Then you can eloquently talk to your consultants about what that tech does and why it's going to be an advantage to them, and create an ROI for them, not just for the business. And I think there's a real big sort of issue from there that we split on how that works when leaders buy tech and don't really understand what the tech capability truly is, because they've had a great salesperson sell that bit of kit to them.
Yeah.
So then the question that comes from that is, why do so many agencies end up with a bloated tech stack full of tools that are completely unutilized? And what's the solution for cutting through all of this noise?
Well, I think I can speak from experience. I think many founders, recruiters, MPs, whatever, they love shiny new things. And we've said this before, if you go to something like the Rec Expo, that used to be a recruitment exhibition mainly with recruiters. It's now a rec tech exhibition, still very good, still very valid, but it's mainly lots and lots of tech guys selling to less recruitment leaders than perhaps used to go early days. And there's so much tech now, it's ubiquitous. You can buy a piece of kit for almost everything you want to do, and buy stuff for things you didn't know you needed. So I think it's one of those things that we like to buy that stuff without it ever coming as joined up thinking. Because many recruitment, certainly the smaller size, don't have an IT specialist that's challenging your leaders to say, well, do you really need that? What's the return on investment on that? How does that fit? So I think one of the solutions is to get someone that you know that have a good IT background in to look at your tech stack. And if you're about to make a new purchase, make sure that you know how it all fits together and you know what the output is. And I've just picked up on the scheme. It sounds like I'm in a swimming pool. I'm actually in a Costa. That is not the bottom floor of the swimming pool. That's the back of the Costa. So I don't quite know why I put that background noise, but I'll turn my mute off. I'll turn my mute on when I'm not speaking.
It's difficult to keep a straight face when these comments are popping up. I totally agree with you, Dave. I think the statement that you hear from tech companies is, you know, our product solves a real world problem. But the statement, you do not need this product at the point in your journey, both of those things can be true at the same time. So just because a product solves a problem, it doesn't mean that's the problem that you should be spending your money on today to solve. And we said this before on the last time we touched on tech. Always start with the business problem that you have today and look for tech to solve it, as opposed to buying tech and then trying to find a problem within your business that it might be able to fix. And then the other thing I would add to what you said, the reason that we get bloated tech stacks, in my opinion, is quite often we don't utilize the tech we already have properly. So go back to your existing supply chain and challenge them to find out what the functionality of their systems are that you're not currently using, and also what's on their development horizon. They might be bringing something in the next 3 to 6 months that you could leverage rather than buying new tech. And the problem with buying new tech all the time is every integration that you have brings an opportunity for a failure or for a breakdown or some sort of challenge in your business. So look to leverage what you have first, look to understand the problems you have, and then find tech to solve those problems rather than being led by the shiny new toy.
I think it's interesting that, I remember sort of in my own recruitment agency, when I first opened the door, and my recruitment partner at the time, or my business partner at the time, he had 2 CRMs sat on a shelf, still in a box, that he had not implemented because he didn't know how to implement it. And they had so much tech. In fact, they were drowning in tech, a bit like Dave in his swimming pool. They were drowning in tech and didn't really know what to do with the tech. And so they had a massive amount of money going out every single week, every single month on all this tech that they procured and wasn't working. So within 3 months, I'd cancelled all their tech subscriptions and implemented one CRM. In fact, he said, I don't think you'll get that CRM up and running. I got it up and running within a couple of weeks because we had no data to really put onto the CRM. But what I did was I started to look at the CRM should be the hub of everything that goes on in that business. And every spoke that comes off that hub needs to be connected to the hub. And therefore, there wasn't anything else other than the hub in the middle. So I always think what you're talking about, Martin, is right. Look for the problem that it can solve, okay? Or look for the problem that you've got. Can the tech solve it? But only if it can connect with the technology that you've already got. And at the time we put Bullhorn in, and that year I won a Bullhorn Prize for innovation about using their tech because we created almost a seamless structure. And what that structure did, it increased capability and capacity for our consultants. It reduced errors in the back office for our back office. It dropped our DSO from something like 65 days to less than 30 days. And all of a sudden, because we were all using the same tech and using it in the right way. So if we've got to start to think you've got bloated tech because people see this shiny new toy, my first thought is, does it connect to what I'm doing already or have already? If not, then why am I buying it? If it's curing a problem, can I then take that problem and go back to my tech provider and say, can you cure this problem? Because I can almost guarantee 9 out of 10, they're going to say, yes, it's this piece of kit that you're not using and not utilizing within your current tech stack. And I see that constantly where people say, I want to change tech, I want to do tech. Why? I wanted to do this, this, and this, because as Dave said, I've been to the expo, I've seen this. And I go back and speak to your tech provider, and they go, oh my God, I didn't realize it did that. I didn't realize it did that, because they don't know their own tech well enough to do that. And they keep buying add-ons because they think that's going to cause a problem, when actually what it does is create confusion. And from a data point of view, individual extra silos of data that then never get harvested and used. So here's an interesting question, and I'm really interested on the answer of this. Some recruitment leaders say that their teams just don't use their tech. Is that a leadership issue? Is it a training issue? Or is it a sign that the tech isn't fit for purpose?
I'll go first, and given that I'm drowning, I'll try and keep my answers short. But it absolutely is a leadership issue, because the other 2 parts of that question about training and the use of tech is down to leadership. If you've bought a piece of kit and you've implemented well and you've got project champions, then it's up to you as the leader to make sure your staff know how to use it, know the benefits of why to use it in the way they should, and that they use it. It is only down to leadership. If you allow your consultants to do things that perhaps are less use of tech and therefore not driving the performance you need, and that comes down to leadership. And it could be team leader, it could be a manager level, it could be office manager level, director level, whatever. But it's definitely down to leadership, because the training that you need and in the implementation that you need, you as the leader are accountable for that.
So I agree with you, Dave, although I can just feel the collective sigh around the room of people, leaders around the room going, oh, great, it's my fault again, is it? Which, and I sympathize with that. So whilst I agree with you, I think like anything within a business, the leader is accountable for the solution. It doesn't necessarily mean they are responsible, because if tech becomes top down from the leader only, that in itself will hinder adoption, because the staff will feel tech's something that happens to them. Solving problems through tech is something that happens to them. They don't have a collective role as well. So I wrote down that the challenge is communication, and it's the leaders communicating effectively why they've invested in the tech and the problem that that tech is supposed to solve, but also communication the other way, asking the business, what problems do you have? What barriers can I invest in tech to remove on your behalf to help you do your job better? And I've seen projects kicked off to invest in tech where no one who will be using the tech is present on the project board. So they're not capturing the pain of the business. So they buy the tech, they implement the tech, and then say, why aren't you using it? And everyone looks blankly that, I didn't ask for it. So my advice is, yes, it's a leadership challenge, but that doesn't mean you have to do everything. Just engage and involve the business bottom up so they feel that they are part of the solution. And I'd say start small. Start on relatively small pain that you can solve quickly with tech, then celebrate the success and build a culture of successful tech adoption. So when you do bring more and more into your business, the attitude is, how do we make this work? Not, oh God, another tech thing that's come in and I don't know how to use it. So I would say it is a leadership challenge, but it's a challenge that they're not alone in trying to solve.
Well, I think it's a bit of a, I'm going to put is it tech fit for purpose to one side at the moment, and I'm going to go back to, is it a leadership issue? Is it a training issue? And I think it's both. And I think, like the first answer that I said, I think if you as a leader aren't immersed in your tech, and what you're saying there, Martin, as well, is that quite often in the bigger companies, you haven't got someone who's using the tech who's actually in that steering group and steering committee. Okay. So sometimes when you're not immersed, then it will never get used. The tech never get used. And initially, if you think about the habits that you've spent years and years ingraining into your recruiters, you're now asking them to change that habit. And therefore, there's a massive fear of change. We don't like the pain that change creates. And we think that when change comes, it comes instantly. When it doesn't, it takes a while for these things to start to embed. So I think, if you especially look at, say, some of the clients that I'm working with that are really worried about, changing tech because they're afraid of changing their back office processes. But to me, then, is that the tail wagging the dog? Because for the back office process, if we can improve them, then we may do something about them. And I'll go back to when I sort of implemented Bullhorn. I had a similar sort of issue with the guys on the floor, or the people on the floor, who weren't really trying to use that. And so I started to ask them what their problems were. They said, well, yeah, look, I write it all down on here, I write it down on my pad, etc., etc. Then I've got to transfer it onto the CRM, etc., etc. So I thought, okay, as an experiment, I'm going to try this. So I went in one weekend and I removed every pad, every pen, and every piece of paper from the office and presented everybody with a set of headphones. Said, right, okay, we're going to try this for a week and see what happens. We're going to try just type straight onto our system using headphones so our hands are free. Oh my God, by the end of that week, how much work had been put onto the system, how much quicker had people got at doing certain things, because I'd taken away their old crutch and said, right, okay, let's get rid of the old habit and let's try change it. So it was a bit of a forced change. But what it highlighted to them is how quick that tech was and how good that tech was for doing certain things. Because the bits that you mentioned about, you can see how long this client's been working here. You can see how long these CVs. You can see where the bottlenecks were. They could start to see where their own bottlenecks were, and it really started to work for them. It made their job easier. We also then started to create every Wednesday a meeting where the team would all sit in a small office, and you had to bring something about the tech that would enhance people's capability. And as a small business, there was only 6 or 7 at the time. As a small business, it was really interesting. People bringing little bits of tech out, little bits. I've been trying this, I've been working on this, and people go, oh my God, I didn't know that existed. And all of a sudden, we got a massive, massive input into how the business was using. What that produced was a 75% decrease in our advertising budget, because they worked out how to code candidates, how to find candidates quickly, how to match that candidate to a client quickly, take a candidate to the market, etc., etc. And once they understood that it was going to make them money, boy, did they embrace the tech. And I think that's the bit that they've got to understand how it makes money. So yeah, that was a bit of a forceful sort of push, but it was meant as a bit of a joke to start with, and they saw it as a bit of a joke. But once they started to work on it, they could actually see what was happening. But you'd had to remove that old habit and kill the old habit. Otherwise, people will go back to the old habit because it's so much easier to do, because that's what they know. They fear anything that's new that's coming through. So how do you identify then whether your current tech stack is helping or hindering your recruiters' productivity?
One of the things that many years ago that we did, we had a new CIO, and she came in and she got everybody to process map everything that they did. Everybody was on the same system, but many people did many things in a very different way. And doing the process map, it got us to understand who was doing what, why it was working, why it wasn't working. And I think if you've got, whether you're a big company or a small company, that's something that's very easy to do, because you'll be able to understand, are you getting the best out of the tech you've got, or do you need new tech, or do you need it for a certain, do you need to buy a bolt-on to do a different service? So I think if you have the opportunity to do that, I would certainly encourage everybody to process map what they're doing and see if they're getting the best out of it.
I agree. And I'm glad you said the word process there, Dave, because I don't think it's tech that hinders their productivity. It's the processes that we as leaders in the business lay on top of the tech. The caveat to that is integration of multiple tech. So when you're looking at your stack as a whole, limiting the amount of handoffs and the amount of double keying of information that you have to put in. But if you're looking at a standalone piece of tech, it's the processes that kill you. And I think most people on this call will either be currently still billers, so they will be users of the tech. So the question I would ask you is, do you lead by example and follow the optimum processes within the business? If you are a bit more removed from data entry into the systems, when was the last time you sat with one of your recruiters and made sure you do understand the end-to-end processes and you understand where their pain is, and you try to find that question where the answer is, well, we've always done it like that, and challenge it of, do we need to do this? Do we need to do this? And try and weed out those kind of frustrating things that we put in there. But I think the answer comes back to the understanding what productivity is, because I'll say it again, short-term productivity may be hit for the benefit of longer-term scalable productivity as a business. So the key thing will be, a recruiter may say, and I give a great example where I used to work, recruiters used to say, well, I haven't quite got the email address yet, so I'll just put xxx@.com, and that gets through the thing. That might have saved them a minute or two digging out that person's email from LinkedIn or a social media site. But from a marketing perspective, when we try to communicate with our candidate base on our database, which is our IP, we can't do it. And we can't warm those candidates up. We can't keep the database relevant to save time in the long term for the recruiter. So where you do find that a recruiter is frustrated, explain the long-term productivity benefits to them and show them that it will work in the long term. I think that's the key.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it, that both of you mentioned sort of process mapping to a certain degree. The biggest viewed webinar that we had last year on YouTube was Cy Bohr's webinar, when he was talking about process mapping and how to process map your tech, and from there. And it's a really interesting sort of viewpoint that if you are thinking about reviewing your processes, you should be asking your team what's going on. You know, speak to your providers. But what I tend to see is lots of recruitment agencies buy tech and then try to shoehorn their process into their tech, and it doesn't match. Rather than thinking, right, what's the tech process? Right, we need to change our process to match the tech process, and therefore it makes things a lot easier to run. And so the things that may be, inverted commas, hindering or secretly hindering consultants and the business are probably the fact that your processes don't match your tech processes. And so we've got to start to realize that is probably losing us money. And therefore, if we changed our process, then could we sort of look at what our productivity and capability could be? So if you start to measure your capability and use of tech, then you start to look at your capacity that you're breaking from it. And so there's a question there that I think you sort of touched on there, Martin, that if it's not broken, it doesn't need fixing. when actually that's true. But if you're not progressing, you're going backwards. So if you're not upgrading your processes, so again, as a recruiting leader, I'd be saying, why aren't you upgrading your processes? Because everything that does on tech is upgraded. Otherwise, we'd all be still on Windows 95, you know, and we've got to start to think we don't upgrade our processes in line with our tech. We look at a process and think, right, can we shoehorn that into our tech, which causes problems and then causes consultants not to want to use that tech because they think it's hindering them. And it's simple things like that that starts to open the tech people's eyes, because they just put tech in for tech's sake because they get further away from the coal face as well. Where you look at new technology that comes out. I've just been speaking to a new CRM provider just to find out what they do. They've just all literally in the business have come out from recruitment. I've looked at their tech and boy, does it fit what recruiters do, because they are so close to it. Bullhorn was exactly like that, but now look at Bullhorn now. It's so far away from the coal face to a certain degree because it's trying to add everything in on top of that rather than what's the core responsibility for this tech? What does it do? Okay. And it should be all about enabling your consultants to do the job quicker, faster, and easier. I wrote this question and I thought about this question quite a bit. Okay. What are the signs that your recruiters are working around your tech rather than using it to their advantage? And how do you get them to adopt new technology?
I'll start out just quickly again, as I assume to say in the channel. Three things: yellow post-it notes, loads and loads of paper, massive filing cabinets. You can walk onto a sales floor and you can see those that are up to date as you ever can be with tech, and those that are still maybe use kind of old tech and a mixture of paper and stuff like that. That isn't to say you need a clear desk policy, that's just to say that a lot of the work that we do manually can be done if we understand how to do it. If we have the training and have the leadership on points we had earlier. So I think if you see that, you kind of know that the sectors are really. And I've always used this phrase, let the data decide. And it's if the data is available for all your consultants, because they don't put it on correctly, or they don't know how to put it on, or to not to point earlier where they avoided putting it on, and then you as a leader, no.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think from my experience of managing teams like this, the first sign I get is when forecasts and pipeline don't match the data that I'm seeing in the system. And it's that classic, you sit down with someone and say, you're below, your forecast pipeline is below the expectations. And the answer is always, oh, yeah, I've got more than that. It's just not in the system yet. And I think for me, it's trying to get the recognition that data doesn't belong to me as the leader. Data doesn't belong to the individual. Data is neutral. And when you go into one-to-ones with your staff and you ask for their forecasts and their pipeline, it's not their responsibility necessarily to bring the data to you and say, here is my pipeline and forecast. What changed the mindset in the business that I used to run was I'd go into those meetings and I would say, here is your forecast and pipeline data. Let's talk about it. So there wasn't any debate about what the numbers were. The numbers were factual. It's what was in the system. They then taught me through the viability of each of those opportunities. And I think that's the key thing, is it's changing the mindset of if it isn't in the system, it doesn't exist. And you have to work back from that. And you have to manage through the system to drive the right behavior, to get the right data input from your staff. And then I'd also say a key thing will be, if you're looking to change the culture in your business and you're scaling up and hiring, when you hire people, make sure some of your competency-based questions are around, when have you used a CRM before? Give me an example of where proper data input allowed you to do business that you wouldn't have otherwise done. And make sure you hire people that come in with a mindset of using a system, as opposed to someone who's a great biller and can show you good figures, but is going to come in and further pull you away from using the systems properly.
So when I wrote the question, I almost thought, is it a rhetorical question? And I think you have to, I couldn't quite sort of put my foot on it. And I think your conversation there, Martin, was really right. Because I remember doing this with forecasting, then I'll go back to when brought Bullhorn in, and the thing that really sort of led the revolution was we had a consultant that was constantly coming in and saying, my pipeline's 150K, my pipeline's this, my pipeline's that. And it got to the point where people were laughing at him because his pipeline was never delivered, and he was never delivering anywhere near his pipeline. He was delivering 5-6K a month, and that was about it. But his pipeline was always huge. After 6 months, though, of using the system, I could go in and actually show him what his forecast would be based on what his clients were doing, based on what his candidates were doing, based on what he was putting into the system. And once he started to understand that, then what he started to look at was how he could improve his performance based on what the data was telling him. So what we started to see that they stopped working around the tech because they started to understand the tech could lead them to a better performance and improve the performance. What it also meant that they weren't having to work longer hours. They were working shorter hours because they could speed up, their efficiency started to put in place. So the signs that your tech, your recruiters are working around your tech is exactly what we said, is that you can start to see it. And I think the other side that says that they're working around your tech is when you start to mine your data. And this was the first thing I looked at was, great, Martin, you've made a placement. You put the job on at 11:31. You had CVs out at 11:32. You had your interview at 11:33, and you'd made a placement by 11:34. Either you're the best recruiter in the world, or you've just done that now, and that's not in real time. Yeah. And so the idea was, if you start to put your data into the system in real time, and you get real time data back, you can start to see where the benefits are, where the profit is that's working on there. If not, then it's just somewhere to store information, but that data is then corrupt. And so they're right, if it's not on the system, it doesn't exist. But also if it's on the system, you've got to look about how it's been put onto the system. And that's the bit when you start to see people working around your tech. And I used to measure that constantly. Wow, you've made a placement in 2 hours. How have you done that? And occasionally people had made a placement in 2 hours. And you could mark that and say, that's brilliant. But most of the time it was them just being lazy with their tech.
So Howard, an interesting question. I'd be keen to get your view on it. Where I've done this before, and I'm sure the advice I've given here would help a leader to do this, it falls into the stick rather than the carrot. That you end up looking at it, go, well, how do I drive change? It's either, do I withhold commission? Do I build it into one-to-ones and have disciplinaries around not using the tech? That works to an extent, but you also want a positive momentum. So how do you also get that carrot and that positivity in using tech?
So I was thinking about the carrot and stick routine. And I always think the problem that we've got when we put tech in front of people is that the carrot is so far away from the person's nose and mouth that they can't actually get a nibble on it. So they can't touch it. And so I think sometimes having to use the stick drives the carrot into the person's mouth. And so I'll go, because I did exactly that. I said, if it's not on properly, then I'm going to withhold your commission. But then we've moved and said, right, okay, but if next month you start to put it on properly, then you get your commission that we've withheld back, and you get that. And I think I had to do it once. And what it started to demonstrate was that I've got the go ahead to do it, and I've got the right to do it, but I'll then pay it back if you start to do the right thing. If not, then it doesn't get paid back. But it started to show that actually when we start to drive the tech, and that was the bit once you sat down and started to analyze it with people and they realized what benefit it would have, then the carrot and stick disappeared because they saw the benefit themselves. Sometimes you've got to push, sometimes you've got to pull, and it's a hard decision on stuff like commission, but sometimes it's the right decision to do. And that's maybe harsh on your consultants, but sometimes, if you want to crack an egg, you've got to give it a bit of a crack sometimes, haven't you? Yeah. So an interesting question then. If you could only invest in one piece of technology to drive recruiters' performance, what would it be and why?
I thought about this quite a lot because there's obviously a hell of a lot of really interesting, new, innovative AI-led tech out there. But every time I thought around what I would invest in, it came back to a CRM. It would be a CRM that's fit for my purpose as a business. And there are brilliant CRMs out there. You talked about Bullhorn. I've used that in a corporate business and it was fantastic. I then went to a smaller business and it wasn't fit for purpose. And we integrated Job Adder, which was much more intuitive and fit for purpose. The one you talked about this morning was barely any bells and whistles. But if I was a solopreneur or in a small business, I'd look at that because it did exactly what I wanted it to do. So I would find a fit for purpose CRM. I'd make sure that it can demonstrate or has a roadmap for integrating future bolt-ons so that as my business grows, I could grow with my CRM. And I'd also make sure it integrated front to back office so that that pay bill system was seamless and there weren't handovers on that side of things. So I would do that because without a CRM and the data in the CRM, you don't have a business. If we're saying candidates are your IP, you need to know where they are, how to get hold of them quickly, and how to engage and communicate with them. And anything other than that technology, if an individual consultant leaves, they take the IP with them. If they keep it in the CRM and the CRM is the heartbeat of your business, you are not dependent on any single individual joining or leaving your business. Your business stands alone on itself.
So Dave was going to answer, but Dave's got tech problems. Apparently, Costa Coffee or Nero, wherever he is, then there are other coffee houses available, apparently. Wherever he is, they're playing with their tech. They've got a man there playing with their tech. So that's why he sounds like he's drowning. He's not really drowning. That's why he is. So I can't better your answer there, Martin, but I'm going to give a slightly different aspect of it. Okay.
I would stop there, Howard. That's fine. Just I've made a note.
I'll cut and paste that and just put that out as the advert. So I'm going to say you're right. That CRM is your one piece of tech that I would invest in. However, I'd invest in something else as well. I would invest in developing my managers on how to utilize that piece of tech. So I'd spend more money on training my managers, developing my managers to utilize that piece of tech and develop that piece of tech. Because if they are doing it, then the staff below will be doing it. So all my management from my team lead all the way up would be all developed on how to use that tech. So everyone knows how to use that tech. And then if you take us three on here, you know, everyone keeps saying tech is very intuitive, it's very easy to use, but we'd have three different ways of using that tech because we have three different ways of ourselves looking at what's intuitive to us will be different to what everybody else is. So I'd be training my managers to absolutely understand the tech and work how that tech goes. I'd be training them to say, right, this is the tech process. We need to change our processes to match that process. Now let's roll that out and let's develop that. So my one piece of tech would be my CRM, but the biggest place where I'd invest in would be the development and training of my managers to ensure everybody else is following suit. Final question then. How can recruitment leaders strike the right balance between automation and maintaining personal, human-led candidate and client experience?
I see how this works now, Howard. You ask a question like the last one, which was, what one thing would you invest in? And your answer is the two things I'd invest in. And then I look stupid. So I get how it works now.
You took my answer, Matt. You took my answer. I had to think of something else. That's the problem with going last on these things, that I always go last. So everyone nicks my answers and I've got to think of something different.
So that question then about striking the right balance between automation and personal human-led, I'm going to challenge your question before you end up tearing it up and answering something else. And I'm going to say, I don't think it is about balance. I don't think it is either automation or personal contact. The first thing you should do is you should look at your business. What are you looking to automate and why? And if the human interaction is important to your business, don't automate it. The whole point of automation is to free up your time to have more human interaction in the areas that you've identified as important to a business. So if you're going to automate some pay bill connection with your customer, make sure that you're having better conversations with them or from a recruitment level. And that comes back to your top point earlier on about process and evolving processes. If as a business we invest in tech that automates some of our processes, that should free up time. So what behavioral change do we expect to see from our consultants, and how are we going to measure and track that? So if I invest in something that enables my consultants to automate outreach to customers to a certain extent, I'd want to see more face-to-face customer time with those consultants. So as a business leader, I need to change how I'm going to measure performance, and I need to put KPIs in place that track an improved face-to-face time between my consultants and their customers. So actually that automation increases human contact, but the human contact I'm looking to see. So that's a bit of a clumsy answer, Howard, but I would say it's not a balance. If it is about balancing, you're probably looking at automating the wrong things.
So that's a really interesting sort of thought process. And I'll go back to a conversation that I've had this week. I think sometimes it's where we think the human interaction should take place. And so this week I was talking to a client, for example, who was, has some reasonably old tech. That tech isn't really being upgraded. So are they now losing competitive advantage against their competitors out in the marketplace who've got better tech that can get to candidates quicker, faster, etc.? And we were talking about using an app for the temp market, that we could use that app, and that app could then, keep in contact with our temps. We could send messages to our temps. We could get temps to update their own availability, which is a big thing for temps. We could put a timesheeting system onto that app, etc., etc. And the question came, but isn't that taking the human element out of recruitment? And my thought process was very simple. No, because if we're putting only people onto that app that are a level 9 or a level 10 consultant, brilliant candidate, okay, and we're asking them to update it, we're giving them, the clients, access to that data, but not the names from a GDPR point of view, so they can say, right, that candidate's available, that's candidate, I'll take that candidate from there. We'll have interviewed the candidate, we'll have spoken to the candidate's probably worked for us. So we'll know those candidates, therefore that human interaction has taken place. But the ease it gives our clients to interact then with their marketplace suddenly becomes so much more productive from a client point of view and from an agency point of view. And I've got clients using those type of apps already, and they're saying that their clients love it because rather than having to wake up in the morning, go, oh my God, this person hasn't turned up to work, I need to call 4 or 5 agencies, they're straight on an app and going, right, oh, there's a person with a skill set that can do my job, press, and that person appears. And that becomes a very different way of doing business. And you start to think about how we do most things today. There's an app for almost everything. Our phones are full of apps that we're using. And so is that not the modern way? But the data you put onto your app, the human interaction before that data gets on there, is the bit that makes that app worthwhile, because the clients won't work with the app if forever they're pressing on something and no one ever appears, or that person's not available, etc., etc. So keeping the data clean on your app becomes really important, and that's the human interaction side. So I think there's so much things that we can do about balancing automation and balancing that human interaction piece, but it's understanding where the interaction should take place and what benefit that interaction actually has to the candidate and to the client and to the business. Yep. So I think there's some really interesting sort of points there. And I said, the idea of this conversation today wasn't about getting technical. The idea was, well, let's look at this as a non-tech solution of how we can sort of better our tech and look at that. And if I was a leader listening to this, the first thing I'd sort of think about is, where are my bottlenecks? How can I improve my tech? And I would always want to become that pain in the butt to my tech provider. How do I do this? 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 Okay, because that's the only way you're going to get anything out of your tech provider. That's the only way you're going to learn out of your tech providers, is actually start to work with them to find out what's in their system and what's coming in their system. So that's the end of this recruitment series. Next week, we are going into our first webinar of March. And the week after that, we release our first podcast. The first podcast that we're going to release is all about growth in a business. There'll be 4 podcasts that will be released over a period of time, aiming at different sizes of businesses. So the first podcast is a solo business to 5 heads, then it's 6 heads to 25 heads, then it's 26 heads to 50 heads, and 50 heads plus. And it's really interesting that we've started to hear what our guests have been saying. And Martin, you put it eloquently last week that there are some common threads between your business that you interviewed, which was a 1 to 5 heads, and the business that I interviewed, which was a 250 plus head business. There were some massive common threads through those businesses. There was massive differences as well. So it's going to be really interesting when we get Dave and Paul's bit in the middle that connects them two together. And so that'll be released on starting Wednesday, the 12th of March. So ladies and gents, thanks for this week. We look forward to seeing you all again next week, and then the podcast the week after. Thank you very much. Dave, Martin. Dave, stop drowning now. Catch you later. Bye.